Okay, so we are going to be setting up today in this video, preparing for our keyframe transitions. We are going to be setting up translate keyframes for a ball bounce so that we can come through tomorrow or in a later part of this video and change the speed at which it transitions between those points in time. So we are going to need for that under I have already posted the screenshot again. It is under the straight ahead ball bounce, so you might already have it saved from earlier. But our ball bounce screenshot you're going to need today. The reason why we're going to work off of this screenshot is because in the past, people have made the size of their ball relative to the size of the scene at varying sizes, and so that leads to you having digressions, so to speak, from the speed that other people are having in class or from my example, which just leads to more confusion. So we're going to use, again, our example ball bounce as our guide for what we're doing today. So you're going to need to download this screenshot. Once you have your new scene made in Harmony, File, Import Images, and you can find that screenshot wherever it's saved. So if it's in your downloads, just go look for that and bring it in. And so now, before we start doing anything else in here, we're going to switch to our scale tool. I'm going to zoom out, and holding shift and at the corners, I'm going to scale up my ball bounce image until it fills the camera. So that way when I make my ball bounce, it will use the entire frame as best as possible. So now I just have this single scale keyframe that's on the image that I brought in of the ball bounce. So now let's start setting up the scene. So my drawing layer that's made by default, I'm just going to name that stage because this is what I'm going to set up as the stage for our ball bounce. Using the rectangle tool, or you can use the pencil tool with a thick line or a brush, whatever seems best for you. But I need to make a base, a ground plane, for my ball to fall against. So on frame 1 of my stage drawing layer, I'm going to make a new line, or a new color rather, sorry, and I'll name this ground. And my ground, let's make it brown. We'll make it dirt. So I got a darkish brown. And I'm just going to draw a rectangle. You can go outside the bounds of the camera. And one thing I will point out is that because of how these frames were drawn, not every frame that was drawn where it's at its lowest point is necessarily where it is touching the ground. So you can see out here, you can figure out where the bottom should be. If you end up needing to move it after the fact, you can select your object and resize it or scale it so that it lines up with the bottom of this image. And once you have that, just fill it in. So now I have a ground plane for my ball to hit. Similarly, we need a place for our ball to originate from. So since we don't have a hand throwing the ball like in the video, we'll use a column that the ball will roll off of, so to speak. So I'll make another new color, and I'll name this pillar, and I'll decide what color I want to make my pillar. Let's go with like a minty green. Okay, so my pillar will be a minty green. And I'm going to draw a rectangle that goes up to where my ball rests. And try and make it so that the ball starts basically on the very edge of this rectangle. So I've made my rectangle. I use the black arrow, dragged across it to select it. And it can be kind of difficult to move it because it's very finicky. You can update the size to make it a little bit more visible. There we go. Where's the compass? I don't want to know. There we go. You zoom in enough, it'll give you, you have to hover over it to get the thing. If you also fill it in first, actually, it'll be really easy to do. If I use my brain, I would know that. There we go. There we go. So now my ball is going to originate on the edge of this platform. Let me come down here and make sure this is all filled in. I moved it, so now it's not filled in down here. And I'll just fill in. Oh, it doesn't like that these are coplanar. Whatever. So fill in your rectangle. Boom. I got a column. I got a ground plane. So that's all that should be on your stage. I will then make a new drawing layer, and this will be for just my ball, as we will then add a peg to this in a moment. So add and close. I'll zoom in on frame 1 of where my ball starts. Using the ellipse tool, I'll make a new color, and this one will be for my ball. And my ball, I'm going to make a nice, deep, sort of navy blue, just for funsies. I'm also going to increase the thickness of my line so it's not so hard to see. There we go. Grab this. I'm using shift, remember, to keep things in proportion. And so now I got my ball oriented with where it should start. It's okay that it overlaps a little bit since we're kind of fudging the start. Don't worry about it. And then I'll fill this in with the paint bucket. Before you are done with your ball, though, there's one special thing that you need to do on the ball, and you need to give it some kind of motif or symbol or some method of adding something to this ball so that it will be obvious when it is rotating, because I need to be able to see the rotation occurring at the end. So it could be as simple as you taking the line tool and white and doing just like a little, you know, cross, like not a cross per se, but a plus sign, right? So that it's obvious when the ball is rotating. It could just be a little minus like this, if you're kind of feeling that. I am going to put a star. I'll put a little star. I'm just going to draw a little 5-pointed star here using white lines. Take my paint bucket and I'll fill in. There we go. Fill in these little areas. So now my ball has a little white star on it. So that way when I rotate it later, it will be very obvious what is happening. So for right now, I'm going to turn off the ball bounce screenshot so we can see what we have drawn. A stage with a ground and a pillar, a ball on its own layer with a little motif, and then once you have both of those, you'll want to add a color card to set your background. Remember to click the little sun icon, and then the white box brings this up, and I'm going to choose like a soft yellow as my background. A little off-white, a little beige. And there we have it. So there is the start of my scene. So let me pause for a moment. So now, I don't know why I just switched off of Harmony, but now we have what we need to get ready to start animating. So the first thing we need to do is give ourselves the time to animate. So as usual, it starts with the base 60 frames. So I am going to, either you can drag out this little red bar here, or if you want to be fancy, because we haven't talked about it yet, this stop number right here, I'm just going to set that to 200. Oh, it doesn't let me extend it. Oh, rip. Okay. Oh, okay. I see what's up with this. Never mind. I'm sorry, video people. Don't look at that. People in class also don't look at it, but you already saw it. So just drag the red tab out. My bad. Drag the red tab all the way out to 200. Give ourselves the time to animate. It's going to take less than 200 frames, but we can move this tab back when we know how far it's going to go. So now with our red tab all the way out at 200 frames, the ball layer, I'll click in the ball layer on frame 200, extend my exposure, stage layer, 200, extend exposure. All right. So that brings us to adding,
how many frames are we using?
200. So that brings us to actually setting our ball in a peg and adding keyframes. So I'm going to add a peg to the ball layer, add peg. And now I'll turn my screenshot back on to help me guide where my ball should be going. And I'll grab my translate tool on frame 1 of the peg layer, put that peg right onto the ball. There we go. Sorry, I'm being nitpicky. Okay. And so on frame 1, we want to set plus KF and set a keyframe. And then now we can start setting keyframes for our translation. So as we did with the first assignment, we're going to put this on 2s. It's going to slow down the ball slightly, but we'll see how it looks when it's done being animated. So if this is frame 1, so we'll do 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, plus 1 for this one makes it 20 frames in the future. So on frame 20, I'll move the ball down. And again, the image doesn't show the frame where it's hitting the ground, but on frame 20, we're going to have it hit the ground. So it'll move slightly off from the pacing that our picture has. So now I can turn on the control, and you'll see I get a straight line going down. And we'll come back and fix that in a minute. But for now, I'm just going to keep going forward into my next bounce. And so I'm just going to count 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18 frames as it slows into the top of our bounce. Slow in, slow out. So 18 frames in the future, frame 38, ball comes up, ball moves over. And so now we have the same problem that we had with Pac-Man. The Harmony does not know that the ball should be moving straight into this point. It is trying to give us a nice clean arc. That will be helpful for the top of the bounce, but at the bottom of the bounce, we want it to arrive at that point and with tension, move equal and opposite directions out of that point in time. So, transform tool, click my bottom point, tension to 1. And now you can see how that fixes this. This one's not fixed yet. We'll come back to that. But when I now finish the rest of this bounce, so with my translate tool, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. Boom. Go 16 frames in the future. Frame 54. Move it down. Move it over. And you can see how that creates an arc. Now, with our tension, we have been using +1 as a way to tighten the tension of our arcs. But what if we want to loosen the tension of our arcs? Well, by the same factor, if I use my transform tool and click the point at the top, you can use a negative value. Now, -1, I will show you, is a little exaggerated, and you can see how that exaggerates the bounce heavily. That seems like a little too much. So something more in the realm of negative 0.5 is a much more reasonable tension value. And then we continue. So then 2, here, let me zoom in a little bit. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Yep, so 12 frames in the future. So 54 to 66. Oh, we didn't extend our screenshot. We'll fix that in a second. So boom, I'll move it up and over. And then what's happening here is our screenshot is not exposed all the way to the end. My bad. Reminder to expose this all the way to the end so we can see it the whole time we work. And I'll come back to my keyframe on 66. That was off. So I'll line it up. And then I'll figure out 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 frames in the future, which is here. And get this down to the bottom. And so that way, you can do this all at the end, but I'm just showing you because I'm doing it as an example. So now I've got this. At the bottom, the tension should be 1. And at the top, the tension can be like negative 0.5. You won't need to have tension changes on each of the top keyframes, especially as the bounces become smaller. But so I could even do like a negative 0.3 on this one, and it actually is a little bit more accurate to the arc that we have there, because it's part of the changes to the velocity, changes to the gravity and inertia that this ball is experiencing. So then we continue. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh no, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. We'll go 10 frames forward. So 90. Translate tool. Bring it up. Bring it over. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Yeah. And then 2, 4, 6, 8 to get to the bottom. Ba-boom. Ba-boom. Again, click the transform tool to tense to maximum, +1 at the bottom of the bounce. And at the apex of the bounce, some negative number smaller than 0.5. So I'll do negative 0.3 again on this one. And that helps. And so now if I just play what I've got here from the start, let me turn off my backdrop. And so our ball now moves linearly through these translate keyframes, more or less. So you should continue to finish this out. And then once you have all of your translate keyframes, again, make sure the tension is set to 1 at the keyframes at the bottom. And the tension at the top is somewhere between negative 0.5 and negative 0.1, if not 0. I mean, you can honestly just use 0 on these last couple of them. It'll be fine. It'll arc enough, I think. So you're just counting out paint by numbers, similar to when we first did this, but now you just got to set the keyframes here and there and tweak them, and then the computer will figure out the rest. So I'm going to pause. I'm going to stop the video, actually. Okay, so today we are going to pick up with using ease to adjust our transform keyframes, and then I will go through the process of how we can add squash and stretch to our ball, as well as rotation to our ball, so it rotates and squashes and stretches as it moves through its bounces. So you should already have all of your keyframes set for your transform, or translate rather, and you will want to turn back on the control so that you can see your path. I will point out that I did not complete my full ball bounce, you know, because I'm demoing. So from here, if you did not do this already, I just want to point out, I don't think I mentioned this yesterday in my third period where I'm at now, but you will want to go on, say, like frame 6 and or even frame 5, really, if you want. And you will just want to move this ball into the third drawing using the translate tool, because what happens is that without this frame, it doesn't really have an arc. It just goes in a straight line. So to get that arc, I just will go on frame 5 and move it so that my ball stays up here. So that way, and then move it out a little bit too so that it gives you that shape, a little bit of arc. It's not going to be perfect. And that's kind of the key of this assignment, folks, is that I'm using the ball bounce as a mechanism to teach you this process. Your ball bounce will not be perfect at the end. It might look a little ponderously slow through the top of your arcs and such. We would then go through and tweak the timing and stuff to sort of affect that, as well as, you know, you'd actually use more keyframes than just the ones that we have here. So, but that's not the so-called end result we're going for. We're using this as a vehicle to learn some new stuff. So anyway, what we're going to first look at is how quickly our ball moves from these locations in space over time. So I'm looking at my ball falling to the ground and how that speed should change, because just like with Pac-Man, it has, by default, linear speed. So ease is what describes the rate of transition between your selected keyframes. So by default, it is linear. So your keyframe, your in-betweens between keyframes are spread out evenly. But you may want to, I should have these flipped over, but it's fine. That rapid in is first. So you may need to have your ball rapidly approach its end result and then slow into that end result at the very end. Or vice versa, you have it slowly build up speed and then rapidly approach its new location as you get closer to that keyframe. So going back here, our ball should be picking up speed as it approaches the ground. So to do that, we would want to have it slowly pick up speed from the ease menu. Now, to change the ease, you select the keyframe that ease you want to change, and then from the little drop-down menu for ease, you find the ease type that best describes what you're trying to do. So these S-curve ones are not useful for what we're doing, so don't worry about that. We're looking at these three here and these three here. So for our ball approaching the ground, it should slowly build up in speed and then be accelerating as it reaches the bottom. And so that is our slow in type of ease. So it's slowly building up its speed versus rapidly picking up its speed. So that goes to, I'm going to use the middle one because this one can be very extreme, the most extreme ease type. So I'm going to use the middle one. And so what that will do is, oh, I forgot about this last time. Let me turn this off real quick so you folks can see. I'll put a color card. Let me fix my color card. I want to put like a nice soft sky blue. Make it easy for you folks to see what's up. And so now if you look at the spacing of my frames on my control, you can see how that spacing increases as it approaches the ground. That brings me to my next keyframe, the keyframe where the ball is on the ground. What its behavior should be like from here is that the ball should, again, rebound with serious force from the ground because it's accelerating into the ground, compressing its energy, and then rebounding. As it approaches the top of the bounce, its energy will start to equate with the force of gravity on it and therefore slow it down. So it stops rising as quickly. So it's fast at first and then slow at the top. So then we'll use the opposite, our rapid in ease type. Again, I'm selected on the keyframe on my peg. Choose from the drop-down menu the correct ease type I want to use. And again, you can see how my keyframes are spaced out here and more close together as they reach the top. Onward to frame 38. So now, again, my ball is coming from the top, and it should be slowly accelerating as it reaches the ground. So slow at the top, accelerating as it gets closer to the ground, and gravity is pulling on it more strongly. Or it's, I should say that its energy is not being counteracted by gravity. Gravity is not increasing. So that brings us to the opposite ease type again. So I'll use my slow in ease type. So it's slow at the top, fast at the bottom. Then I go to my next keyframe. Do it again. Rapidly build up speed at the bottom, slow at the top. And then as you start getting past your second bounce, you can switch to the lesser ease type. So let me go here. Boom. I'll use my slow in the middle again. And that will bring me to where it hits the ground here. And I'll use the lesser rapid in. So like the smallest one, the most mild. And then from the top of this bounce, I'll use my slower slow in. Boom. So if I zoom out and play this, oh, it helps when you play it from the beginning, Chris. And that's what I was alluding to when I said it's not going to be perfect. Again, this is a vehicle to teach you this process. I know it does get kind of bunchy at the top, but that's because this isn't exactly how you would set up keyframes for a ball bounce if you're trying to get it super accurate. So that is the first step, is going through and adjusting the ease for these translate keyframes so that you approximate that transition in speed throughout the bounce. And it'll also look a little better once you add squash and stretch too, because that'll help sell the realism, so to speak. Okay. So I'm going to pause there for a second. So we are going to now do something very similar to when we were working on Pac-Man. And for Pac-Man, we had a nested peg that went between our ball, or our Pac-Man, and the translate keyframes that we set originally, that allowed us to rotate and also scale Pac-Man. For when Pac-Man needed to flip, we inverted the scale factor, and then otherwise we used the rotation to make Pac-Man face the right way. So we're going to do something very similarly for us to allow squash and stretch to happen on this ball as we go. So I have my ball drawing selected. Make sure you're selected on the drawing, not the peg. So be selected on the drawing. You'll add a new parent peg, so you'll hit the orange peg button. And so now you can see I have ball P1 now, which is empty, between that and the keyframes I already set. And this is going to be my squash and stretch keyframes. So this is what's going to allow me to squash and stretch my ball. So now we're starting back at frame 1. I'll put my peg on the center of my ball. And basically what I'm going to do is on frame 1, I'll add a plus KF button, so that'll keyframe every value. And I'm going to open up my values using the plus sign on the layer so I can see what values I'm having and also manually type them in as I go along doing my squash and stretch. So my ball is going to hit the ground on frame 20. So if I go to frame 20, here's my ball on the ground. before my ball reaches the ground, it should be accelerating and therefore stretching as forces are exerted on it. So that means the frame before it hits the ground, it should be at its most stretched. So now I'm going to go ahead and stretch this out slightly. It tells me that that was 1.32. And the key here is that your ball should maintain its volume throughout this. So if I stretched my ball lengthwise, and it tells me it's 1.32 of its size, I should conversely lose 0.32 in this direction. So this would become 0.68. Again, you can eyeball it. As long as it's close, it's fine. But, you know, if you do it with math, it'll add up to 2, more or less. And then finally, I'll set a rotate keyframe that angles it in the direction it's falling. Now, it is kind of wacky for this step because your ball is going to end up scooting on its butt for this stage until we add the rotation for the whole ball as our last step. So for this squash and stretch step, you're going to be making your ball scoot on its butt. So now we're on frame 20, where the ball hits the ground, and it should now squash instead of stretch. So again, you can use the regular scale tool, but it's pretty handy for today to use the scale values, since we now know we can access these. So then you can just inverse these. So now it should be elongated lengthwise. So I'll put 1.32 here and 0.68 there. And you will notice my ball is now too short to touch the ground. All we need to do is go back and grab our translate tool. You'll click back onto the main peg that we set with our translate keyframes. Just make sure your translate keyframe still goes all the way to the ground. Now, 2 frames in the future, that's where you're going to want to go back to your squash peg and rebound it. Now, every bounce that it hits the ground, it should be shedding energy, dispelling kinetic energy as it hits the ground. So if we were doing, 0.32 and 0.68 as our values, I should be slightly less long. So we'll go back to scale Y, should be longer, and I'll do, say, 1.25. And so that means my scale of X becomes 0.75, so that it is keeping its proportion. Then I just need to rotate and angle it where it's headed. So look at my spread of keyframes here. I've got a scale keyframes and a rotate keyframe. 2 scale keyframes when it hits the ground for the squash. Scale and rotate keyframe as it moves into the next bounce. Once it reaches the top of the bounce, quite simply, the forces should all be neutral. Therefore, the rotate should be 0, and my scale should be 1 and 1. So that's when you definitely want to use the values. And then we go again. So here it is hitting the ground at frame 54. So that means on frame 53, I am going to use my scale tool and make sure I'm on the right frame, or the right peg rather. Stretch it out. Cool, 1.2, I guess. So that means this should be 0.8. Cool. So again, if you elongate it, it should maintain its volume by squishing it in the opposite direction. Rotate to get it angled with my arc. Then I go to the frame where it hits the ground. And I can just flip these values. So this is 1.2 in the scale X now. And, whoops, 0.8 in the scale Y, so it is squishy. Again, I'll go back to my main translate peg and fix the translate so that it's still touching the ground. And then I can go forward 2 frames, back onto my squash peg, and then, let's see, Oopsie. Be careful, Chris. It's too long. Should be dispelling energy, so okay, 1.8. 1.18 rather. Cool. So then this should be 1.8 or 0.82. Boom. And then rotate it so it's angled the right way. And then back at the top again. No rotation. Rotation back to 0. Scale factors become +1 and +1. At the smaller levels, folks, I will just say it's easier to do it numerically. So now I'm at the bottom of this bounce again, 1 frame before. And if I did 1.8 scale Y before, I'll do 1.15, 1.18 rather. And that means this will be 0.85. Boom. And then I just got to rotate this the right direction. Go forward a frame. Flip these values, 1.15, 0.85. Move tool. Oh, wrong peg. Be careful. Go back to my main peg. Just tweak that. We want to keep things separated. Make our lives easier. And then scale tool again. And if my scale Y is going to increase a little bit, let's say this is 1.1. And this will be 0.9. And then again, rotate it in the right direction. Back at the top, 0, 1, and 1. So now if I go and play it back, nope, I did it again. You can see how the ball is squishing as it goes. So one more time. See that squash and stretch in action. Okay. So once you have your squash and stretch done, I will show you how to rotate. So I'm going to pause and give people a second there. So once you have your squash and stretch done, adding the rotate is very, very simple. We're going to add yet another parent peg between our ball and now our squash so that it will be rotating before it gets squashed, before it gets moved. So then you'll have stack, 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 right? And this one is the rotatos. And basically, quite simply for it, on frame 1, you'll set a keyframe with no rotate, boom, plus KF, just a blank keyframe. Find the end of your ball bounce, so let's say it ends at frame 130. I don't know how long yours is going to go, and mine doesn't go all the way to 130, but you'll go to the very end. And then make sure you got your dot on the ball. There it is. It's a new peg, so you got to move the pivot point yet again. And then rotate your ball a fair bit. You can sort of guess and check this. So I just spun my ball around a bunch. It will again rotate with linear speed if I don't change anything, which actually looks pretty good. But we can go back here to frame 1 and just simply set some ease where it rotates quickly and then sheds rotating as it gets to the end. So I'll just use my middle rapid in. So this bottom, second one from the bottom, boom. And now if you watch this back, it will rotate while it squash and stretches while it moves. Mine's just rotating over here because I have extra time. So that's how you do all of that. That's how you go from translating, setting your ease to adjust how your translate keyframes happen, setting your squash and stretch keyframes, finally adding those two keyframes for rotate, spinning it a bunch, and then using the ease just on the first frame so that it uses a lot of rotates as it has more energy, and then stops rotating as it loses energy. And that is that. That's the ball bounce. So thank you for watching. I'm going to stop recording.